this is what the fountain would, you'd be standing here looking out that way, or well, over there looking out, and it's just beautiful views of the mountains.
Absolutely beautiful.
And you can really see, the water coming out of those lions' mouths, and then it had two other, I think it had intertwined dolphins, and then another bowl, and then these putti, little cherubs up there. But these are the parts, wrapped.
You must be so excited to get this far now.
Yeah, it's starting to feel real. A lot of,
talk to this guy.
Yeah, and then we're a lot of
So then that would convince the new living to tell everyone who lives here.
I just don't think it was sometimes this happens with good intentions, but you and my husband was very young.
You never showed up his name like
Thanks for coming. Welcome. My name's Tom Riddell, and I've been a part of the committee that's planning a memorial park. Some of you may have walked over or know where it is, but it's right over there, just this side of the two big beech trees. I want to say a few things about kind of the history of the hospital and maybe a little bit about what we're up to, and then I'm going to turn it over to another member of our committee. Jonathan and Meg Wright kind of started the ball rolling to get this gathering together, and unfortunately they couldn't be here, but some of you may have seen this or are familiar with it already, but it's something that Jonathan wrote, which I think captures a good bit of what we're about. He titled it "Lest We Forget," and I just want to read a little bit of it. We are deeply beholden to a course of history that reaches way behind us to days of great hope and expectation. The Northampton State Hospital at its inception was a grand experiment and commitment indeed, reflecting a determination to treat the mentally ill with something other than restraint, abuse, and neglect. For untold generations, the mentally ill were off the radar and crushed by it. Were it not for the vision of earlier citizens who proposed to scoop up this hilltop property, windswept and out of town, and convert it to a safe house for the ill, Village Hill as we know it would likely look like King Street. These hundreds of acres accrue to us because of the plight of the mentally ill and the compassion of those who did and would care for them. A small, important place is being created to remember these people, powerless, often forgotten with their own patterns of ecstasy and suffering, who lived here, healed here, thrived here, and succumbed here. It will be a great way to acknowledge the closer walk we take with the difficult dimensions of life and to create a place of peace and learning. The park will have places to rest, will have educational information and opportunities to reflect. At its center, the original undisturbed fountain basin will be restored, and the original iron fountain will be reconstructed, restored, and installed, initially without water. Helping to defray the costs of the Memorial Park construction is a way to give back the beauty that we have been given in trust. So Jonathan's words are call to mind what used to be here. It was the Northampton State Hospital. It opened in 1858. There were about 250 patients when it first opened. It was in one big, huge building on the top of the hill. The entrance to the main building was right opposite where the fountain basin now stands, just this side of it. So that's north, that's south, that's east, that's west. The fountain was to the east of the main entrance of the building. The hospital quickly became overpopulated. In the middle of the 19th century, we didn't know a lot about mental illness. What they knew is what they knew. There were a lot of mistakes. A lot of people ended up in the hospital who probably shouldn't have been in the hospital. Certainly a lot of people who were in the hospital then that wouldn't be in the hospital now. partly why the hospital isn't here anymore, is that we've come to learn more, understand more, figure out better ways of providing treatment and services for people. And the transition that we've made from then to now is completely mirrored in the history of this hospital. It opened in 1858, as I said. Its peak population was in the 1950s, and by then there were more than 2,500 patients in the state hospital in buildings that dominated the top of this hillside, and then also continued over on the other side of Route 66. And what used to be the memorial complex, and all of those buildings have been demolished and are gone. And there's not much that's left from the original buildings. And the work of this committee has to do with the original request for proposals to redevelop this site. And that is that there needed to be some recognition of the history of the hospital. And what our group is attempting to do is to figure out ways to do that. Those ideas and that work has centered on creating a park over in that space. Mass development has turned that piece of property in essence over to the city. It will become city property, and it will become a small park that's intended to memorialize the history of the hospital. There will be some educational markers talking about the history of the hospital. And I've taught a class about the hospital a number of times at Smith, and students in my most recent classes have contributed lots of ideas to augment the memorialization of the hospital, one of which is a little map over there that superimposes what was here in 2011 compared to the original buildings of the hospital, which are in purple. And their idea was to have a walking tour around the top of Hospital Hill to share some of the history and the experiences of the hospital with visitors and passers-by and people who live in town, and probably even schools. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Martha, who has worked diligently with us to create a design for the park.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This committee, Tom didn't mention, has been working for many, many years. I was formed, Barbara and Joe, I don't know, 10 years ago, something like that?
Oh, it's even longer.
Maybe longer, right. With trying to figure out a way to do this memorial and to figure out this park. I joined the committee about 3 years ago. I'm a historical commission member, and the chair of our commission came to me and said, you know, they've got this rusty old fountain that they're trying to put together up there at that state hospital site. Could you maybe, do you have any experience with that, and could you help them? I'm a registered landscape architect. I have my own practice based here in Northampton, but I work all over New England, and I work almost exclusively on historic properties. So I've dealt with a lot of old cast iron. Believe me, it's everywhere, and most of it is in terrible condition, but it's salvageable. So what I did is I came to the committee and offered them as a contribution to the committee and to the historical commission and to the city and to this neighborhood, my services as a designer to try to come up with an idea. And we pretty quickly arrived at what we wanted to do. I showed them several alternatives, and I think that what we landed on in the end is what you see here. And it's a very simple design. Now, this piece of property, if you walk up there after we're done, you can see how small this is. It's about 1/4 of an acre. And a lot of it is on a very steep slope. So you can understand why mass development wasn't particularly interested in holding on to it for a house lot. But, our job as a designer is to try to take a crummy piece of land and make it into something that looks great. And so this is what we tried to do. And as Tom mentioned, the fountain is the centerpiece of this. So this is the property here. We're standing down here. Jonathan Wright and Meg Wright's house is here, and there's a new house being built up here. The fountain base is there, and the property has been cleared. As part of the construction of this new house, Wright Builders has made a contribution to the project to do what we call site preparation, They've cleared all the vegetation out of it. So you can really see the property now, and you can see that fountain base, which for many years, up until this year, really was not visible at all in the summer, and actually in the winter too, because it was buried under overgrown vegetation, poison ivy, and things like that. So what we've done is design just a very simple walkway that leads into and around the fountain and then out again. And along the walkway will be some seating, and then at the fountain, 3 interpretive panels, which are located on the east side looking west towards where Old Main used to be. So it will help orient the visitors and hopefully help them imagine what was there at one time that was gone. One of the important pieces of this, Tom worked with a Smith student for a couple of years trying to develop a memorial component to this, and her name is Elena Brooks. She came up with a wonderful idea of planting daffodil in memory of each of the patients at the hospital, and looked at a number of different sites all around and had some trouble dealing with different property owners, not here, but around the hospital site. So we've incorporated that into the park design. So the daffodils will be included in this redevelopment of the slope. This is the east side, and it's a steep slope that goes down to a pathway down here. So all of those daffodils will be filling that area there, and possibly in the lawn as well, and around the fountain. The other piece of this, which we did at the city's request, was to connect the park down to the trail system below. So if anybody has walked down in this area where there are the large beech trees that you can see here, the big kind of reddish purpley trees in the distance, those are European beeches. The pathway will lead down the slope in a curving manner that's accessible, meaning it's not steep, and it will lead to the existing pathway that's down here. So people using the pathway system throughout the state hospital site and beyond will be able to connect to the park through that means, which is great. Now again, planting on either side to give the property owner some screening, and that's the very simple design. So there are 2 things that I want to talk to you about. One is we are in the process of raising funds for this. We have estimated the cost of this to be about $250,000, and at the moment we have about 35% of that in hand. The fountain is a very big piece of it. Only half of the fountain remains. When the state hospital closed, it was abandoned. The fountain was abandoned, and a lot of it was looted. Excuse me. Yeah, loitered.
Either one.
So part of the work is going to involve restoring the pieces that we have, which are in storage up at the DPW, and then recurating some of the pieces that are missing. We have had the whole fountain designed, so to speak, so the pieces that have to be replaced, we have a design for. But that's about half of the cost of the project. So we're in the process of trying to raise funds for this, and any contribution you feel as neighbors to this property that you can make to this would be very helpful. There is a fund that's been established in the city, set up to receive donations, and we've already received a few from Smith and some other people who are not necessarily affiliated with this. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that we're working with a very small committee. Four of us are here, and we have a few other members who kind of drift in and out. If any of you are interested in joining us to help spread the word about this, to help us raise funds, to help see the project through to completion, we would love to have you on our committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions about it. Yes.
How many daffodils are you talking about?
It's 60,000.
Oh my
Yeah, so
Yeah.
her idea
Eventually.
was to plant enough daffodils so that in the end there would be 65,000, which was an approximation of the number of patients who were in the hospital during its entire history, 135 years. And to get 65,000, you don't have to plant 65,000. I'm not a gardener, but
They multiply.
they multiply.
You start with 10,000 and then they multiply.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be
and
very.
these kinds of big projects like that have been done. Just getting a group of people plant, and it's done in a couple days, so even.
And Martha's visions focused on the park. I have a more extensive vision, which I like to amuse myself with, even though I haven't checked with the authorities that would probably be required to approve it. But the path from 66 that comes up the hill and eventually circles back that way, I think that'd be a really nice place to plant a lot of daffodils all the way up, the path that led up to the park.
If they'll compete with the poison ivy.
Oh.
Maybe they'll push them out.
I'd say that the design of the park is relatively simple so that the city can maintain it without stressing the DPW too much. And we don't actually know that the DPW is interested in maintaining the fountain. But the park is certainly also set up so that if there were a group of neighbors that were interested in doing some gardening there to make it nicer, that it would be it's open. It's definitely open to that. But it's simple enough that the city will be able to maintain it adequately within their current way of doing things.
What are the plans about water for the fountain? Obviously, it sounds like you're not going to do any water to begin with. Is there ever a vision of that, or just...
There is, yeah, and it's in the budget to include the appurtenances to set that up. We've looked at the engineering for it, and there's water in the street. We may be able to connect the electrical to the work that's being done in the new house. So there's been discussion about that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a requirement of the planning board, and I forgot to mention that the planning board has reviewed this, and we do have a permit. It has been permitted, so they've approved it, which is great. But they do want a recirculating fountain, so we won't be using a lot of water, city water.
Thanks for your leadership on this.
Oh, well,
Thank you, guys.
And yours.
I just, Martha's easel here, this is what we have remaining of the fountain. This is what it looked like in its full historical glory and when it worked as a fountain. And Martha discovered this.
there was an article in the newspaper about this. Did anybody see this a few years ago?
Somebody
One of the
discovered
Ross
it.
brothers
Yeah.
found it in their
They found they had one of the lion's heads.
And these are on, it's 5-sided, right? It's a pentagon.
I think it's a hexagon.
Hexagon. It's well, whatever it is. Yeah, it's a hexagon. I can count. And so there were 6 lion heads on it that spit out water. We have one, and a part of the initial phase of restoring it would be to recreate 5 more of those, so that they'd be all around.
So if anybody wants a lion's head, we can once we get the mold made,
Yeah, we can make more.
everyone should have a lion's head for their porch. It could be the Northampton Hospital, the little.
That could be a fundraiser.
It's a good fundraiser.
You think?
Everybody
The fountain was made in England by a company called Handyside, and there are 2 others of these exact fountains extant in the world. One is in Argentina, and one's in England. We have no idea how it got, how the people that were putting together the state hospital found out about Handyside. But the idea for the fountain came from a group of people who used to work at the hospital who thought that this would be the nicest, most practical way of memorializing the people who lived in Northampton.
There was also a requirement putting water into the into the hospital from the municipal water system. So at that point, it might have been Ryan left. Ryan just got a ordinance passed by the city that we won't privatize our water supply. And but when it started out, it was a private company, and part of the contract to bring water up to the state hospital was to put in the water supply for the fountain in 1876. We should also thank the musicians.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Yeah.